on demand as usual, guys. And just bear with us as we go. I will have to be manually advancing the slideshow on behalf of Dr. Minteer. So if things are a little disjointed, that's why. But with that, I will waste no more of your time and take it away, Dr. Minteer. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Molly. Thank you all for waiting around. I'm pretty excited to be able to present to you today. I am a little disappointed that I wore makeup for this since you can't see me at this point, but I hope you enjoy this presentation. So we're gonna talk about two forest invaders from two different continents. So we're gonna talk about air potato and Brazilian pepper tree. There's this asterisk by my name because this is a huge caveat. I just get to be the person that gets to tell you about these invasives and the control programs surrounding them. This is definitely 30 years worth of work. I cannot possibly list everyone who has had a hand in this work on this title slide. So if you're particularly interested in a portion of the story, the works are cited on each of the slides as we go through. So go ahead, Molly, to the next slide.
Okay.
Okay, most people who are on this webinar are going to be very familiar with invasive plants, but just in case you're not, invasive plants are exotic species that are introduced for numerous reasons into new areas. So these are some of the worst invasive plant species in Florida and part of the Southeast. I know for the rest of the Southeast, I'm missing a lot of plants. But so these are some of the big ones. And so we'll talk about a couple of these today. But so these plants get introduced for all sorts of reasons, and they can start to cause harm in our ecosystems. All right, next. Problems caused by some of these invasive species are environmental in nature. So we can crowd out and outcompete native vegetation. So you see in this photo, we have old world climbing fern that is obviously climbing up over trees. They have found deer that have gotten tangled in these mats and have actually died because they couldn't get out. So these can cause some massive environmental issues. When you start to crowd out and outcompete your native vegetation, you then reduce the forage and your habitat for your native fauna, or just start killing things like deer to get tangled. You can also alter fire regimes. You can alter water flow. Next. You could also threaten commercial, agricultural, and recreational activities. So if you see down at the bottom right-hand corner, that is tropical soda apple. It was a major invader in rangelands just 10 or 15 years ago. That is mostly under control, at least in South Florida. We're working on improving control in other areas of the Southeast. And in the top right-hand corner, we have water hyacinth. Water hyacinth is also known as the world's worst aquatic weed. As you can imagine, though, that could greatly inhibit commercial activities. You can't get ships through these interconnected mats. It also doesn't really make fishing or skiing very much fun. Okay, next. Some of these invaders can actually cause harm to human or animal health. A lot of these invasive species can be allergenic to humans. As you can see, this nasty rash over on the right, we'll talk about a little bit later. A lot of these species can also be extremely toxic to livestock and other animals. Okay, next. So in my title slide, we talked about how we were going to talk about from two different continents. And so today we're going to talk about air potato. And air potato is native to Africa, Southeast Asia, and Northern Australia. And then we're going to hop over to the other side of the world and talk about Brazilian pepper tree that is native to South America. Next. Okay, so first is air potato. So air potato is a climbing vine that grows very, very quickly and can climb over our trees. So this is an infestation in Florida that shows how quickly this can get out of hand. For those of you all more north to Florida, this looks very much like kudzu. Completely covers the trees. Doesn't quite grow quite as fast as kudzu, but pretty close. Okay, next, Molly. So air potato was actually introduced into North America in the late 18th century. Now, the details of this introduction are very fuzzy. There's no real concrete evidence when or how it got introduced. Next. But there is concrete evidence that it was brought into Florida in 1905 by a horticulturalist by the name of Harry Nehrling. Now, Henry thought that this plant was going to be a fantastic ornamental. It is got these big, beautiful heart-shaped leaves, and thought that it had potential as a food crop. So Henry then sent some of this plant down to the USDA lab in southern Florida and asked them to evaluate it as a food crop. They found out two things when it was down there. They found out, one, that you could not eat it. So definitely didn't have any use as a food crop. There are some articles online that say that if you boil it enough times, you can eat it, but I don't want to find out, and I really don't suggest that you do it either. So not very good as a food crop. All right, next. They also found out, USDA found out, that these plants grew especially fast and that they thought that this could be problematic in the future. However, they didn't relay that message to Henry, and Henry continued to plant this plant. And so by the 1990s, infestations were spreading very quickly in the US and continue to spread at this point. All right, next. And this plant has completely clobbered a majority of Florida. So this is from EdMaps. EdMaps is, of course, crowdsourced data. The green counties are where these plants occur. So it's definitely a problem in Florida. It's also definitely a problem in Hawaii, but we're starting to get spread into the southeast and beyond parts of the southeast at this point. All right, next. Okay, as I said before, this is a twining vine. This vine can grow up to 21 meters in length, so 21 meters up a tree, and can grow up to 20 centimeters a day. So that's up to 8 inches in a single day. You can literally watch this plant grow. I have just recently collected some time-lapse footage. It was not quite ready to put in this presentation, unfortunately, but you can literally sit there and watch it grow if you're that bored. So next, Molly. This plant spreads vegetatively through aerial bulbils. So you can see here on this the blue background picture. This is where it gets its name. So these bulbils grow in the axils of the leaves, very high up in the canopy, and so that's why they're called air potatoes. You definitely don't want to get hit in the head by one of these falling in the fall. So, but watch yourself when you're tromping around the woods. All right, next. Okay, one more time, Molly. Okay, vines grow throughout the summer, and they actually senesce through the fall and winter. So a lot of people do control. The vines disappear in the winter. They think they got it. Come to find out in the spring, and they come back up. Go back one more.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, got a little squirrely. That's fine. So I told you a lot of animations. One
sure.
more, Molly. Okay, so once these bulbils fall, you'll actually get the roots come out, and each one of those bulbils can produce another plant. And so this is very problematic because these vines can actually produce hundreds of these things per vine. And so it can spread very, very quickly through this. All right, Molly. So we know this plant can grow very, very quickly, and that it produces copious amounts of these bulbils that will all produce more vines. How do we control it? Well, mechanical control is always an option. All right, next. Due to the climbing nature of this vine, mechanical control can be very difficult. You can cut the vine, try to pull them out of the trees. That's very difficult. You have a really high chance that you're going to harm your desirable vegetation. Mowing can sometimes be helpful for these vines, but you need to avoid mowing if bulbils are present. Like I said, each one of those bulbils can and most likely will produce a new vine, and it's just going to cause more of a problem. All right, next. Now, what we found in Florida was that air potato roundups can be kind of fun. These are all smiling, happy faces of my crew who have collected 1,600 pounds of air potato in a little more than 2 hours. Now, most people wouldn't be smiling after this. This is very hard work. It's very hard work, but I bribed them with a paycheck. So they enjoyed themselves. We also had a little competition, and a lot of municipalities in Florida do this, and it works pretty well to get those out. It gets people excited about, you know, removing invasive species. It spreads the word about the damage that these species can do. All right, next. Now, if you're going to do one of these air potato roundups, I suggest that you do it in the winter, because many places in the southeast aren't real fun to hang out a couple hours in the hot sun during the summer. The vines are also senesced back in the winter, and so it's easier to find these bulbils on the ground at that point. If you do one of these, I cannot stress enough how important it is to either incinerate the bulbils or to freeze them. You can freeze them for 24 hours and they won't sprout, because I've double bagged these things. These things, they will sprout and they will come out of that plastic bag. And so the best way to not spread this, if you do this, is to freeze or incinerate them. All right, next. All right, next, Molly. Did I lose you?
Looks like, thank you all for your patience here. Carey, I can't hear you, but I'm going to get to the bottom of that now. Good. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. We should be able to hear you now, Dr. Minteer. Can you speak again?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Some
Okay.
connectivity issue.
Perfect.
What a shocker. Okay.
Okay, so our next option for control is obviously chemical. So UF IFAS recommends a foliar application of glyphosate. All right, next. This is where you're going to earn your money. Lots of animations. Okay. Of course, this is a high twining vine, and so application can be difficult because you want to get pretty good coverage. So often, partial control is achieved during foliar applications. All right, next. Unfortunately, a foliar application doesn't kill the bulbils that are already present, and of course, those bulbils are going to reproduce more vines, and so you're kind of spinning your wheels at that point. Next. And so it's extremely important to get rid of the bulbils post-treatment. I cannot stress that enough. You must get rid of those bulbils if you want to make any headway with this vine. All right, next. Okay, glyphosate is also not effective in killing underground tubers. So these plants not only produce those aerial bulbils, but they also have these large underground tubers. All right, next. These tubers will resprout after treatment, and so therefore multiple treatments are needed. Next. Fall is the best time for the spray to be most effective because the plant is pulling all of those nutrients out of the top of the vines and putting it into that tuber. So that's the best time for those for that herbicide to translocate into the underground tuber. But just like I said before, it's not super effective at killing that tuber. Next. And it's, as with any application of an herbicide, it's always follow your label directions on any herbicide treatment. I cannot stress that enough. All right, next.
Okay. Score. All right.
Okay, but there is good news. So we covered mechanical control, we covered chemical control, and they're not super good options there. There is a biological control agent. So this is Lilioceras chenai. It's a chrysomelid beetle. We like to call it charismatic microfauna. It is red. They're super charismatic, super fun. They actually squeak. And so they, quote unquote, talk to you. So they're great for talking to the public about biocontrol. This beetle was discovered in Nepal in 2002 by doctors Robert Pemberton and Min Rayamaji from USDA ARS. They brought it in, did extensive testing, and got approval by the federal government. And first releases of this beetle were made in Florida in 2011. Next. Okay, so there's actually two different biotypes of this beetle that we have released into the southeastern United States. On the left, we have the Chinese version. So these beetles are from China. And on the right, the beetles from Nepal. These are the exact same species. They interbreed. They're just different color morphs. And so their biologies are a little bit different. The Nepalese beetles tend to come out a little earlier in the year. The Chinese beetles tend to last later in the year, but they are the exact same species, have the exact same host range. They're just different colors. All right, next. Okay, so the life cycle of this beetle takes about 28 days. So we have our attractive red beetle up there in the upper right-hand corner. So the ladies lay eggs on the underside of the air potato leaves. So these pale yellow eggs, as you see down in the lower right-hand corner. Once these eggs hatch, we have our larvae down in the lower left-hand corner. Now, the larvae aren't as charismatic as the adult beetles are. They look like little sacks of slime to most people, but these guys are voracious feeders. I cannot tell you how much damage these larvae do to the plants. Once the larvae are ready to pupate, they go down into the soil. You see our pupa in the upper left-hand corner. They are pupa for about 2 weeks, and then they emerge as adults and start the cycle over again. Okay, next. Okay, next, Molly.
I can my screen.
It
seems like maybe there's just a bit of a lag.
That's a delay. Okay.
Okay. It's a full picture screen, says biological control agents have narrow host ranges.
Oh, okay. Well, it doesn't show that on my screen, but there we go. Okay, so.
Okay, let me go back. Okay. Ugh.
Oh, there it is. There it is. Okay. So biological control agents have extremely narrow host ranges. We do a lot of testing to ensure that before they're released, they will only feed and reproduce on our target. So this is a picture of the inside of one of my rearing screenhouses. So all of the vines on the right-hand side and all the vines on the left-hand side that are completely full of holes are air potato. The vine in the middle that's kind of like draped over it is winged yam, Dioscorea alata. Now, these plants are extremely difficult for people to tell apart. It's like leaf thickness and the stem's a little bit ridged on the alata. But I always like to say the insects are the best botanists, and this greenhouse has thousands of Lilioceras chenai in it, and you can tell there are no holes in that winged yam on the top. These guys are host-specific. Winged yam is one of the most closely related plants to air potato, and you can tell they don't have a taste for it. They won't feed on it, and they definitely won't reproduce on it. So very narrow host ranges to make sure that these guys will only harm the plants we want them to harm. All right, next.
There's a bit of a low. I see it. You should be seeing it soon.
Okay, there it is. Okay, so here's what the damage, this is what the damage looks like. So we have been releasing these, or Florida Department of Agriculture has been releasing these things in outside of Florida. So on the right, you see that's what the damage of the adult beetle looks like. And so they take huge chunks out of the inside of the leaf, and a lot of people describe this as my leaves look like lace. And so that's what they do. They do a tremendous job here. Over on the left-hand side, you'll see what the larval damage looks like. So the larvae eat pretty much the whole leaf, and the leaf desiccates. So that's the kind of that big wilted brown mass of used to be leaf tissue is what the larvae do. So they look very different, but so both of these stages feed on the leaves. But the larvae, I think, are far more damaging than the adults are. All right, next. All right. Can't quite see it yet. All right, Molly, can you click next?
Yes, again. Okay, I'm looking at the release program in Florida slide.
Okay, there it is.
So soon.
Okay, yeah, here it is. Okay, so there was a massive release program that was orchestrated in Florida that was a multi-agency effort. So we had 3 labs rearing the insects. So the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, UF-IPAS, and USDA ARS. So all 3 labs were rearing the beetles and offering them to the public for free. We also had one extension agent from St. Lucie County, Florida, Ken Joeli, who helped us get the word out and educate the public on these. And so this was a huge coordinated effort, and I think we've done a phenomenal job getting these beetles out on the landscape. The multi-agency effort actually did end in 2019. The Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services is now taking that, has taken the torch and is carrying that into 2020. All right, next. All right, so hopefully that'll come up. There it is. Okay, so what did the beetle do when it was out there? So these are pictures from Dr. Min Rayamaji at ARS. In the upper left-hand corner, you see an infestation of air potato in June 2012. This is before the release of the beetles. The bottom left-hand corner was August 2013, so a little over a year later. You could definitely see a lot of dieback of the vines there. You can start to see that there are trees in that picture. And on the right-hand side, that's August 2014. So this is a little over 2 years, and you can actually see trees now, and you can see there's a lot less air potato. It's important to note that the beetles will not eradicate the vines. They just lower them to a more tolerable level. But I would be happy with this if this was my backyard. So they have done a tremendous job lowering not just the coverage of the vines, but the number of bulbils produced. All right, next. Okay. So with that multi-agency effort, these beetles are very well established in Florida. So there's no need to release these beetles in Florida anymore. They are everywhere. They are dormant over the winter because the vines are dormant as well. The beetles will reemerge in the summer. Now, I have to warn you that they come up about 4 to 6 weeks after the vines do. And that's when most people freak out. I have air potato in my backyard, and it is extremely difficult to watch those vines grow and not see any beetle damage. I promise you they will come back. They just come back a little later than our vines do. Now, if you're outside of Florida and you have air potato and you are interested in getting these beetles to use on your lands. The Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services is continuing this program, but offering these beetles outside of the state of Florida. So if you actually scan that QR code that's on your screen right now, it will take you to their website. You can fill out the form and they will ship you these beetles free of charge. If you have air potato, you should get these beetles. They do a phenomenal job and you have to do very little work to try to control this vine. All right, next. Okay. These Lilioceras chennae doesn't feed on the bulbils. We've talked about the bulbils. I collect the bulbils in the preserve behind my house every year just to give that biocontrol agent a little bit of a head start. The good news is that Dr. Alan Dre with the USDA ARS lab has been testing another beetle, Lilioceras aegina. These guys feed on the bulbils. And so you can see a female there. She's laying her eggs on the bulbils. On the right, you see the larvae that are feeding. If you open up that bulbul, you might lose your appetite. It looks disgusting, but that bulbul is dead. It is not going to reproduce. It's not going to make a vine. This beetle, I think, could be, the nail in the coffin for air potato in the Southeast. And so this beetle has actually gotten recommended for release by the Technical Advisory Group back in 2018. So we're probably a year and a half from having release permits issued. And so stay tuned for news on that one. All right, next. And now that we're going to switch continents now. So we are going to go down to South America and we are going to talk about Brazilian peppertree. Well, we haven't quite got that new slide yet. Do you see it? Kamala, can you see it?
Point have the other 2 delays that we experienced, so it should be showing up for you soon.
Okay. Oh, there it is. There it is. I was like, if we lose Molly, guys, the ship is sunk. So, okay, so we're going to switch continents. We're going to go down to South America now. So Brazil actually gets all the credit for this tree, but it's actually native to Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, and a little bit of Argentina, but it's called Brazilian pepper tree. So let's go down there and check it out. All right, next. So I'll just keep talking. It'll pop up eventually.
Okay. I'm looking at it. Hopefully.
Okay. So Brazilian pepper tree, the scientific name is Schinus terebinthifolius. Go ahead and click twice, Molly. This is the perennial tree that occurs in coastal and open areas in Brazil, as well as in the southeastern United States. It is a member of the Anacardiaceae, which, if you are familiar with botany at all, that is the plant family of itchy and scratchy things. So it's related to poison ivy. It's related to poison oak. It is also related to delicious things like mango and cashew. But like all of those plants, people can be very sensitive to them. So if you've ever had tricolored peppercorns, the red peppercorns in that mix are Brazilian pepper tree. And so if you're allergic to mangoes or particularly sensitive to poison ivy, you might be cautious about using this peppercorn blend. These Brazilian pepper tree berries are delicious. I've had them on pizza. down in Brazil. They love this plant in Brazil. But if you are sensitive to things in the Anacardiaceae, you might want to stay away. So air potato, not edible. Brazilian pepper tree, totally edible. Okay, next.
Looking at
Okay.
US.
Add a map. Okay, so this is another EdMaps. So as you can tell, Brazilian pepper tree has clobbered all of peninsular Florida. It literally is everywhere. It is also everywhere in Hawaii. There are some counties in Southern California. It is also spread into Southern Georgia, Southern Alabama, and Southern Texas. Okay, next. We try not to share our problems with the rest of the Southeast, but sometimes they just go there. Okay, one more click for me, Molly. So in Florida, the last estimate is that we have 280,000 hectares infested with Brazilian pepper tree. This is probably far more at this point. That's just the latest estimate we have. These plants invade both disturbed and natural sites and can displace native vegetation. This plant was introduced into Florida twice, once into the Miami area and once into the Punta Gorda area. So Miami is, of course, on the southeastern coast of Florida. Punta Gorda is on the southwestern coast of Florida. And Dr. Geo Stone, who is the physician who introduced Brazilian pepper tree into Punta Gorda, is actually on record saying this plant is so beautiful, it ought to be in every garden in Florida. I don't think this is what he meant when he said that, but it is in everybody's backyard. It's along every roadway. It's invading mangroves. It's invading our roadsides. It's invading the Everglades. It is literally everywhere. So I don't think he would be happy with that legacy, but what are you going to do? Now we have to deal with the problem. So next. So this plant cost a ton of money to control in Florida. So state and federal agencies here in Florida, they spend $2.5 million a year on publicly held conservation lands. Now, this does not include private lands. All right, next. Does not include private lands. My graduate student is currently working on a project that is actually looking at how much we're spending on private lands to control this. I spoke to one landowner. He's got a very large cattle ranch. He spends $250,000 a year just on Brazilian pepper tree. And so it's extremely difficult and extremely costly to control. So what makes Brazilian pepper tree so invasive? Well, I like to call it the honey badger of the invasive plants. It just doesn't care. It's tolerant to shade. It's tolerant to fire, drought. It can grow in saline conditions. It will grow almost anywhere. It also is allelopathic, which means that it secretes compounds into the soil that actually can reduce the germination or growth of neighboring plants. So a little bit of plant chemical warfare. It also has hybrid vigor. So I told you that it got introduced in the west side of Florida and the east side of Florida. So these plants came from North and South Brazil. They're different biotypes or different ecotypes. So these guys don't grow near each other in Brazil, but they do grow near each other in Florida, and they have now hybridized and produced this hybrid that is actually grows faster, produces more berries, and is a much better competitor than the ones that were brought over. So we have this super weed almost. It's produced, it has massive plant growth and fruit production. All right, next. And with these bright red berries, they're dispersed by birds. So we have long distance dispersal by birds, which is, this is definitely not something you want with an invasive plant species. So copious amounts of seeds produced, and then the birds carry it everywhere. Okay, next. So we know this is the honey badger of plants. How do we get rid of it? Well, mechanical control, of course, is always one of the options. And here's my graduate student who we spent a good 2 days trying to remove 20 plants out of a research plot. This is back-breaking work. It is hot. These things are large, and it's very difficult. And if you don't treat that stump with some herbicide, it's just going to grow right back. All right, next, Molly. And if you remember, this thing is from the Anacardiaceae. And so we have this rash that you can get. If you are sensitive to the sap of poison ivy, you could be sensitive to the sap of Brazilian pepper. So when you're in there cutting things down, gloves, long sleeves, long pants, and definitely wash any exposed skin as soon as you get back in, because there's a pretty good chance that you could get a rash. So here's our rash picture again. All right, next. Okay, moving on to chemical controls. There are 3 different application methods that you can use to be able to control Brazilian peppertree. There's cut stump, there's basal bark, and foliar sprays. As always, it's always important to read and follow label recommendations on any of these control tactics. All right, next.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. So cut stump applications. There are several different herbicides that you can use for this. So you can use glyphosate, triclopyr, ester, oramine, INVASIVE. All works. It's really important to apply the herbicides to the cambium within 5 minutes of cutting. So the cambium is the layer of living tissue that's just inside the bark. It's imperative that you get the herbicide here or it won't translocate into the roots and kill the tree. All right, next.
Okay.
Okay. There's also basal bark. So basal bark, UFIFIS recommends imazapyr or triclopyr ester. So of course, the basal bark treatment is mixed with an oil. You're going to do a 12 to 18 inch band around the lower part of the tree. So my area of expertise is biological control. As you've probably noticed, I spent a lot more time on talking about these insects than these other types of control. This QR code will get you to the UFIFIS page on the control of Brazilian peppertree. And so specific details are there, but always follow your label. All right, next. All right, same QR code, same web page, but these are your foliar sprays. Triclopyr or glyphosate can be used here. You need to spray to wet, but not to run off. Good coverage is very important. If you don't get good coverage, you're not going to kill that tree. But with any herbicide, you need to take care to avoid drift. And so it's really difficult to get in there and do these foliar sprays. All right, next. Okay, but the good news is that we do have 2 biological control agents that have recently been approved for biological control of Brazilian peppertree. So we've got a THRIPS, Pseudophilothrip itchini, over on the left, and then a leaf-galling species over on the right, CALOPHYA latiforceps. Right. Next.
Okay.
CALOPHYA latiforceps is this cute little yellow insect. They're a millimeter, less than 2 millimeters in length. They're very, very small. They are from northeastern Brazil in the state of Bahia. These are leaf gallers. So these are adults at the top. The immatures are actually create these open pit galls on the surface of the leaves. So you see on the left, these are mature pit galls. In the middle, bottom, we have 2 insects mating. And over on the right, we have a severe infestation of this leaf galler. Okay, next. Our insects, as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, lay eggs on the margins of the leaves. You can see that in the top middle here. So these gray eggs are getting ready to hatch. After the eggs hatch, so that takes about 7 days, the crawlers crawl to the surface, usually the upper surface of the leaf, where they initiate galling. So basically they stick their mouth parts in that leaf. They've picked their spot, and that's where they're going to stay through 5 larval instars. So at the bottom right-hand corner, we have this is our 5th instar of CALOPHYA latiforceps. Looks a little bit like a Pac-Man ghost to me with those eye spots. They're going to sit there, and they act as a nutrient sink to the plant. So the plant is diverting nutrients from growth into growing these galls. The adult then emerges and starts to cycle over again. From development time from egg to adult takes about 40 to 45 days, dependent upon temperature. All right, next.
Okay.
Okay, in our host range studies on this plant, this was actually done by my graduate student, Patricia Project. She found that when you're looking at oviposition or egg laying, you do get oviposition on 7 different plant species. So that tall bar, the light blue over on the left, that is our target weed. So that's Brazilian Peppertree. Then you've got some congeners. So Schinus molly and Schinus polygamous are next, the orange and the gray bar. And then you have much less numbers of eggs laid, but eggs have been laid on some more species. All right, next. So that might bother us. We got egg lay on some plants. But what we found, or what Patricia found, was that these eggs either dried and didn't hatch, or if they did hatch, these insects could not complete gall development on these plants. So on the top, you have Schinus molly, which is Peruvian Peppertree after 30 days. And you can see those dots in the middle of the leaves. Those are dead galls. So this is after 30 days. On the left-hand side, this is Pistachia vera. This is after 16 days. So these eggs did hatch. The crawlers came out and they tried to initiate galls, but all of the galls died. The most damaging life stage for this insect is the galling stage. These did no damage to these plants whatsoever, and they definitely didn't emerge. Over on the right, bottom right, you see the healthy galls in Brazilian Peppertree after 30 days. So there were absolutely no development on any plant species other than Brazilian Peppertree. So extremely host specific. All right, next. So we get, this causes yellowing of the leaves. The leaves are often deformed. And in severe infestations, you do get leaf drop. We all know that the leaves are, of course, the powerhouses of the plant. And so once those leaves drop, you're really going to decrease the amount of growth that that plant can do. All right, next, Molly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is more research by my graduate student and a couple of her collaborators. So on the left graph, we have proportion of missing leaves. So in the orange bar is plants that had insects, and the blue bars are control. So you see there's a much higher proportion of missing leaves in plants that have insects. And over on the right, we have increase in plant height, so plant growth. We have control plants definitely increased in height more than with our insects. All right, next. What we found over one generation of these insects is that plants with insects had a 12% lower relative growth rate. So this was not statistically significant, but we're trying to look at multiple generations to see if this lowers even more. But 12% lower relative growth rate, you can kind of see it in that picture. These plants look much smaller. All right, next. Okay, what we found is that these things are definitely host specific. They're definitely damaging to Brazilian Peppertree, and they got approved for release in June of 2019. That's kind of the end of the good news on that one. Next slide, please. So you can see the two smiling and triumphant looking faces of these young ladies on the screen right now. They have been working on rearing these insects. These guys are extremely hard to rear. And unfortunately, we have lost our colony inside the lab. So we don't have any currently in the lab right now. Next slide. And as you all are very well aware, COVID has ruined everything. And so right now we, of course, have travel restrictions in place. These insects come from Brazil, where the plant comes from. And so we cannot go to Brazil to get more insects currently. We have to collect these insects in the summer months because that is when they're most numerous and at the right stage for us. So the summer months in Brazil, usually November to January, are the best for these guys. If we are able to go down to Brazil in November to January, we can establish a colony in my lab, which is going to take about 2 to 3 months. Then we have to get these insects cleared by the Florida Department of Agriculture. So if the planets align and COVID disappears in a couple months, best case scenario, we can release these guys in mid 2021. But that is absolutely best case scenario. And at this point, doubtful. But we're going to persevere, and we're going to get down to Brazil as soon as humanly possible. All right. Next.
Okay. Yes.
Yep. All right. There we go. Okay. So, but it's not all bad news. So we do have another insect, so Pseudophilothrip's itchini, which is a thrips. All right. Next slide, Molly. Okay. So this is the Brazilian peppertree thrips. So unlike our nice, pretty red beetle for air potato, these have a face only a mother can love. Or an entomologist, I think that these guys are super fun. When they're threatened, they curl up their abdomen like a tiny scorpion, and so they've got real attitude. I like that about them a lot. They're also very damaging to Brazilian peppertree. So this is the life cycle of the thrips. Takes about 30 to 35 days. Our eggs are laid on the new growing stems of the plant. Once they hatch, we have 2 larval stages. So those are the just to the right of the egg. And those guys also feed and are very damaging. And then we have 3 pupal stages, which don't feed, and they pupate in the soil. But then they come back out as adults and start the cycle over again. All right, next. Okay. Host range testing on these thrips was extremely extensive. They tested 127 different plant taxa across 33 orders and 45 families. So a lot of diversity in the testing of these insects. All right, next. And what they found was that they have very narrow host range. So this is in lab testing. These are extremely conservative tests. And what they found is that these thrips will only feed and reproduce over time on Brazilian peppertree. They do feed a little bit on Peruvian peppertree, but they can't really sustain a population on there. So these are extremely conservative tests. Next, Molly. My graduate student, Kristen Bowers, is currently doing field testing of these guys, and preliminary data shows that they're not reproducing on any other plant species. So stay tuned for that. That's preliminary data. But as far as the impact, these guys are extremely impactful to Brazilian peppertree, especially in the lab. So here you have a graph, percent of dry stems. The white bars are controls, so these don't have any insects, and the gray bars do have insects. So this is after 30 days exposure to the thrips. So thrips were placed on these plants and left on the plants for 30 days and then removed. So the set of bars on the left is directly after they're removed. You see a much higher percentage of dried stems on the plants that have the insects. Now, that's great. We know that these insects eat Brazilian peppertree and they're damaging. The truly exciting part to me about this is the set of bars over on the right. So this is 2.5 months after recovery. So 2.5 months after these insects were removed from the plants. And you can see these plants don't really recover, which is important. That constant pressure to these plants is what's important. Okay, next. So the verdict on the thrips, they are host specific. They'll only feed and reproduce over time on Brazilian peppertree. They're very damaging. They are approved for release. And unlike the leaf gallers, releases began in Florida back in June of 2019. Okay. Next. Okay, so what we have done so far, this is a collaboration between my lab and 2 labs down at the USDA. We've released over 130,000 across the state of Florida. What we have figured out so far is that single uncaged releases aren't super effective. They are if you release just thousands at a time. Currently, we're looking at releasing multiple times to see if that will get them established more quickly. And we are also looking at cage releasing. So here you can see a picture with this sleeve cage on Brazilian Peppertree. This is a way that will kind of keep the thrips where we put them so that they're easier to find and also keep predators out. We have seen that ants and spiders love to eat these thrips. And so we think that that's definitely having an impact. But over on the right-hand side, you can see some of the damage that we've seen in the field so far. So we are seeing some damage. It's not extensive yet, but it's still very early in the program. All right, next.
Okay.
We have also been looking at agent spread. We were hoping that we'd have more of a hair situation and these guys would be spreading very quickly. However, we are seeing more turtle-like growth or spread. And so we are seeing that they're spreading, a meter or two over a couple months. But this could change as our populations in the field get to much higher levels. And so stay tuned on that. But we are seeing damage in the field. We are seeing low levels of establishment, and we are still working on it. So next.
All right.
Okay. As I said at the beginning, this is definitely not just work for me, definitely not just work for my lab. This is over 30 years. Definitely have to thank the people on the upper right-hand side of the screen. My lab is amazing. They come to work every day, usually happy to be there, and we have a good time doing science. Nobody in biological control of weeds can do this work alone. We have collaborators all over the world, and they are some of the best scientists to work with. Can't thank them enough. And then also the funding agencies, as well as collaborators. Collaborators at UF, collaborators at USDA, UF IFAS extension agents. There are too many to list, and I didn't want to accidentally leave anybody out. So they know who they are. They have made this work, especially getting these insects released out into the landscape, so much easier. And then our collaborators at the Florida Department of Ag. All right, next.
Okay.
And we have come to the end. Thank you, Molly, so much for your clicking ability. That was amazing. So if you have questions or concerns, we of course will do a Q&A right now, but there's my email address. If you are a social media type, my lab is on Twitter as well as Facebook. If you want to follow us there, that's where you kind of get the newest up-to-date information on things we're doing down here in Florida for the biological control of invasive weeds. But I'll turn it back over to you, Molly.
Wonderful. I think you would be hearing a rousing standing applause. Thank you for being just the consummate professional, pivoting queen. Guys, Dr. Minteer was brainstorming with me behind the scenes how we could make this happen. So thank you so much for sticking with me, Dr. Minteer, and I'm terribly sorry for all of these issues. Yes, I am. I'm getting lots of applause in the text box. Okay, great. Well done. That was such an excellent presentation. I learned so much. I know, so we've kept you all here, including Dr. Minteer, way over schedule. So if you, I don't know, do you have maybe 10 more minutes, Carey, to answer some questions?
Go ahead.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, I think I might go backwards and just kind of start off with where we, speaking on Brazilian Peppertree. Let me see. Okay, that's someone's. Okay, here is a question about air potato. I planted air potato years ago. They have stayed in the same place as planted, at least as far as I can tell. Can they be spread by animals? Until this spring, I thought they had died, but found them climbing a tree. Thanks for the information.
So we don't actually have any concrete evidence that these guys are transported by animals. I mean, these bulbils are large. And so there's, of course, that potential. But we do know is that they also float in water. And so if you're anywhere near a water body, they spread, like they'll just float downstream and then plant themselves someplace else. So where there is potential to be spread by hogs and deer and larger animals. We don't actually have any data on that.
Okay. Continuing with air potato, are the vines annual, meaning do they only produce the bulbils once a year, or do they produce them all year long?
They produce the bulbils in the fall and winter. So you'll start to see maybe here, or at least down here in southern Florida, we'll start to see bulbul production in a few weeks. And so it's just kind of in the fall, and then they're super obvious in the winter because the vines have died back.
Oh, okay. Um, and air potato, another question. Will the plants die from the beetle damage, or do they produce fewer bulbils? Does anything eat the bulbils? Are there any pathogens that are currently being studied for control?
There are no pathogens that I'm aware of that are being studied for control of air potato right now. That could change in the future, but so what the beetles do is the beetles actually damage the vine, and so these there's of course less leaf tissue for producing the sugars necessary for growth. And so what you're going to find is that every year those tubers are going to get smaller and your vines are going to come back less vigorous every year. And so over time, these beetles can start to kill vines. But the first year, you're going to see a lot of holes and hopefully less bulbils. The second year, less vines, less bulbils, and then over time, just a decline. You're never going to completely get rid of air potato with the beetles. You're just not. That's not how classical biological control works. And so, but if I had 1 or 2 vines in my backyard, I would be very happy. It's a beautiful plant. It just takes over everything. And so these beetles are just kind of putting these plants back in their place.
Oh, that's a good point. Okay, this is one, I'm not sure. Well, we'll see. Okay, hi, are you familiar with the Hole in the Donut project at the Everglades? I'm wondering why drastic measures were taken there to scrape the Brazilian pepper trees to the bedrock instead of using biological controls. Are you familiar with that project?
So I've heard of it. It was a little bit before my time. And so I know they were going in there and just really trying to rip out these things. Biological control wasn't available until last year. And so we've been working on biological control of Brazilian pepper for a long time, but we just didn't have anything approved. And so these programs can take, a decade, sometimes more. They've literally been working on Brazilian pepper biological control since the 90s. And so we just didn't have anything yet. Now, of course, we're full steam ahead for integrated control using that biological control component. But yeah, we just had to wait until we had something approved.
Okay. And I think just generally, I know that this is a difficult question to answer concisely, but there are some folks who are raising just, the typical question that we get when we work in biological control. Isn't there some concern with bringing non-native organisms into the country? Maybe, I don't know if you can just touch on just very briefly the screening process that we go to get approval. But I think that would be super helpful for our audience, if that's possible. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, there's totally concern with bringing in exotic organisms because, I mean, at the end of the day, this is an exotic plant pest, right? Like it attacks plants. It's exotic. And so, yeah, like when you look at it like that, that's like red flags everywhere, right? We test so thoroughly that we start testing things that are most closely related to our target plant because that is where the risk is the highest because these plant species are very similar physically, they're very similar chemically. And so if these insects are going to eat anything else, they are going to eat something closely related to the target plant species. And so we test all of them. We test all of the congeners that occur in North America and the Caribbean in the case of Florida. And then as we go out, we can test fewer as you're more distantly related. But we can tell pretty quickly because we test all of those plant species that are closely related if these guys are going to be host specific. If we start getting feeding and reproduction on the ones that are closely related, we're not going to continue. Like it's not worth our time, not worth the money. We move on to the next insect. So I don't know if you all remember that slide from the air potato where it was that big screen house and you had all of those holes. That vine that was in the middle that had absolutely no holes in it is a congener. It's like a brother and a sister. So they're sibling species, right? They are very similar physically. They are very similar chemically. There's not a single hole in those vines. By the time we actually get approval to release these by the federal government, we know without a shadow of a doubt that these guys will only attack our target weed because we have such strict regulations. Like I cannot tell you how much paperwork and regulations goes into this. So yeah, no, it is worrisome, which is why we have perfected the testing methods.
That was so beautifully put. Thank you. Thank you so much. I know that we did Dr. Minteer a terrific disservice with this excellent, gorgeous presentation that was so packed with clear, informative info with our terrible AV. But I cannot thank you enough for persevering with us, Dr. Minteer. I know that everybody who's here greatly appreciates it. I'm getting such glowing reviews in the comment section. And thank you to our audience for being patient with this as well.
Yes, thank you.
This is a unique circumstance, and it's certainly a unique year. I can't say that I'm surprised that another wrench was thrown into it, but we really appreciate you standing by. And I do want to say that we will be doing everything in our power to make sure that all of these issues are fixed by next month, where we have our final fall 2020 webinar. Dr. Minteer, I will certainly be in touch with you after this just to extend my apologies, but thank you so much for sticking by. Now's the time where I am just going to take down the screen. Folks, I will be available for troubleshooting issues if you have any difficulty getting access to your CEU credits, etc. Everybody is saying, glad I stayed on, great presentation. So Dr. Minteer, you have given us more than enough of your time today. Thank you so much. Yes, I'll just say thank you and goodbye. We really, really appreciate you.
All right. Thanks, Molly.
You
talk to you later.
Okay, bye-bye.